where do we begin? So we have a garage episode that will never see the light of day.
That's not true.
It won't. No, at this point, there's no reason to be honest. I'm not saying it in a not sad. What is it? Not a reminiscent way. I'm not saying it in a way that makes me want to air it one day. It's more of like, all right, it's a BT, it's a B-side, and it'll fall to the annals of history. Hey, if this gets popular and someone wants some of the garbage episodes, maybe we'll release it. But for now it'll just sit in the drawer. It's like the Animaniacs. It'll just sit in the tower until someone releases it one day. Strange reference. Anyone who's our age will get it. But yeah.
That's fine. The one thing that maybe we'll release it someday. I don't know. We'll get a second opinion on it. I feel like I was speaking gibberish the whole time. But the one thing that I think I do want to mention from that episode is our marketing discussion from the very beginning.
Oh, that's it? That's the one thing you want to get out of that episode?
Because I think we have to start doing it. So in that episode that will never be aired, we had talked about the best way to get the word out as to what we wanted our audience to do, or what we hoped that they would do that would add to this podcast. And that is leave feedback in whatever way they feel comfortable doing it, social media or whatever. And then we would mind that feedback and engage. And that's kind of what we wanted this to be. We come up with things to talk about. We're not entirely informed about most of the things. We just have opinions. And we were hoping that those out there more informed than us would correct us and we would revisit the topic.
Yep.
Being that is the idea, we wanted to figure out a way to let the audience know that is what we were hoping that they will do, that they will engage us so that we can re-engage with them. They're very much a part of the show. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, please do reach out to us and leave a comment.
Cool. Now, where's that call to action again? That was the big issue last time around. Are we leaving that in the description, or are you going to let the listeners know where to reach us right here? What is our Twitter handle?
Retraction Media. Retraction Media. I had to think about it. Retraction Media. And it's on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
It's on Instagram?
It will be.
Okay. Good. Just double
That's how
checking.
things work. We just set things up. We're flying by the seat of our pants here.
I like it. Blazing saddles. Yeah, all right. So that's marketing. That's the marketing out of the way.
We'll check that off the box.
It's because no one will hear the episode. They won't know how ridiculous it is to pull that one little tidbit out of it. The episode crossed something between Black Lives Matter and gun rights. It really ran the gambit. I think that was in that episode, right? Or did we not talk about gun rights? Was that
texting about that recently? You had shared the gun right advocate lawyer stuff with me. So I don't actually.
It just centered around Jacob Blake. Did we what? Sorry.
You read the two articles comparing.
Correct. Oh, that was it. Yeah, I'm not even going to rehash that because it took a lot to get back around to. On how the way we treat people who go through the system versus the street executions that we see. It got a little. It was intense. How about that? It was an intense episode.
I think, and maybe this isn't a fair distillation, but kind of what is the point of having a justice system if you could just execute people in the street for not complying with an order?
Right. I mean, that was the crux of it. Is that it was hard for me personally to square away the idea that people would support it, right? So people would say, well, this person either had a rap sheet or this person was wanted, so had a warrant for their arrest, and therefore it justifies killing them. So for me, that really was what became a bit personal, because I just can't wrap my head around how you can jump to that conclusion, given the history of like how we as Americans, I think that we tend to pride ourselves, and granted, it doesn't always work out this way. And I think that this had me very much in the waters of like, not trying to go overboard, but trying to stay very mediated. And part of it was that, we think of ourselves as a democratic, just society, unlike a place like North Korea, or how we paint Russia, where we say that there's a legal system. If you're accused of a crime, you're innocent until proven guilty, and then you can go through the jury process, and then that has so many different steps. And if you are found guilty, we have appeals and what have you. And then it's like, how do you go from upholding that system, that very lengthy, taxpayer-rich system, to saying, oh well, that person didn't put his hands on the dashboard fast enough, so the cops were right to kill him. It's like, how do you make that jump? And that's what I was having a hard time rationalizing, is how you get there as a person who might jump to that conclusion. I was trying to see it from that viewpoint, because it's just a viewpoint that is so far on the other side of the spectrum from how I imagine Americans, because I'm an American, but how I imagine we think of ourselves, or how we think of our justice system when we're trying to be incredibly optimistic about what it brings to the table, versus countries with less rigorous penal systems.
Yeah, the thing that I always come back to is how complicated. Well, I hate making statements like this, so I'm going to try not to. But how is it that it's just such an incredibly complicated situation that we find ourselves in? No two situations are the same, but the same type of thing on its surface seems to keep happening. Because I want to say that, obviously, I think the institution needs to be reviewed. I think that we give police officers a really difficult task to begin without the proper resources to execute it. Whether it's support after the fact, or support in responding, training, all that stuff. It's hard to just like place blame in like a one-dimensional way, for me at least, because I keep seeing people bring up very specific situations where it's like, yeah, well, every other time but then, but it kind of like happens after a while starts to show me that, I don't know, that it's really difficult for someone like me to comment on, because, well, I haven't read studies, and it goes back to what we were saying in that episode. Like, where are the studies that will show us how should we respond to certain situations? Do you have that task force versus a beat cop? Are they armed differently, trained differently? Do they have supporting staff, like psychiatrists or something that accompany them? You have all these different ways of approaching a million different situations, and I'm not going to pretend to be a professional that can solution this, but I don't know if, like, where do you start down the road of solutioning it? Because right now it's burn it down and start from scratch. I hear, and then obviously the reaction to that from the other side is, it's fine how it is. You hate America. I mean, right. It's kind of like distilling it probably to the extremes, but that's kind of what I hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah. Again, it's hard. It's hard to come at it nuanced, especially if there's a lot you could bring to it, right? And part of that is, if you look at let me go here. I'll take this out of the last episode, because this was the part that I was most not enraged about, because that's far from the truth. It's, you get to a certain point where you have the same type of killings, right? You have the same type of situation. Some of the peculiarities may change, such as one guy might have, been running away. Another guy is already in handcuffs when he's executed. So there's always differences in terms of the peculiarities of the situation. But it's really a hard one, right? Because this is why it makes it hard for me, because there's the history of policing, right? Which doesn't have the greatest of it's not the greatest path, right? If you were to get into it, and that's why I wonder, because I wonder if there are people who even debate sort of the history of policing, or how policing has been applied in America, right? Because you could say there are people who are like, well, there's more arrests in inner cities because there's more crime in inner cities, so therefore you need to apply more police to the inner cities, and then it's just a vicious cycle that has nothing to do with race. But it's sort of like, but then you're kind of omitting why inner cities are are mostly populated with immigrants and minorities to begin with, because you're like, well, that actually is race related in terms of like who is given loans at different times throughout history in order to buy houses in the suburbs. You have redlining and you could look to these facts and people will ignore those facts, right? And I think that's part of where the discussion comes is if you believe in the police, you're a patriot. If you're against the police, you're some sort of Antifa, leftist extremist, like about you're one step away from like bombing and destroying America from within, right? And that's sort of where I wish that the lines were not drawn in those two camps, because there's so much pain and suffering in the middle, right? And it's just in terms of like the everyday lives of people who do live in the inner city and do experience excessive police force in over crimes that if you were a suburban person would never even pique the interest of your local police force, such as like a couple of kids on a beach smoking weed, right? Most suburban towns, I don't think a cop would pull up and arrest all those teenagers and put them in jail, and then a judge would throw them into juvenile hall and rip them out of like high school, right? I don't think that happens very much if you think about a suburban town. Versus that very thing would probably happen if you were in an inner city and you were found doing the exact same crime. And there is data to back that up. We could pull that in. But again, we're just in this weird place where it's like you could prove your point with research, and someone could easily just come down and say, well, that research is funded by a left-wing organization that invalidates it, and and you could just find a way to hide behind your gut beliefs, even if it is distorting reality. And I mean that could happen on both sides, but when it comes to policing, I feel like there is enough data to sort of say, this country has a history of aggressive policing, and I think that on that bare face, right, without getting into any of the peculiarities of how it's distributed, on that bare face, you could just go back. You could do Rodney King, you could do any of the number of black men and women who have been murdered throughout the 90s into the 2000s. You could just keep pulling them up and saying, well, these are unarmed civilians in America that have faced excessive force. And you have to say, well, why is that? Why do we have this culture? Why do our police in this fashion, and then another country's police do not? Why you don't have these same incidents in the UK or in Australia or in Canada? And don't get me wrong, I'm sure you can pull out a case of police brutality in Canada, and actually I do know it does happen there too. But there definitely seems to be an outsized not reaction, but there's just an outsized number of incidents within the United States versus some of our other Western counterparts.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, because people will always. I'm glad people are interested in data. I wish that more understood how data can be manipulated and sliced and diced in different ways. And I wish we could come up with meaningful statistics, benchmarks to look at, because it's not always the same. People want to look at these rates that may on their surface may seem helpful, and they do add context. But when it comes to something like this, and again, I'm not going to comment on exactly what benchmarks they are, but I know when I see arguments being made using certain statistics that they're they're not telling the whole story. And I think we need a little more sophistication than a meme circulating on Facebook that gives us the full story. One thing I found to be interesting in terms of an argument being made is that it's starting to seem like critiquing tradition or admitting flaws in general seems to be labeled as un-American. I don't think that we should take examples of something not working and immediately demonize it and say we need to change it, or allowing extreme elements of any type, which I think this is the fear that's part of the narrative now, allowing extreme elements to hijack anything to turn it into something extreme. I feel like that's like the fear mongering that's going on now. But realistically, if something's established decades, hundreds of years before present day, it's kind of unrealistic to assume that it'll always work. I don't understand why we can't, and let's take policing specifically, why we cannot revisit how we qualify a candidate to become a cadet, how we train cadets, how frequently we evaluate performance, how we hold offenses accountable nationally, because we spoke about last time of the example of cops having a complaint filed against them, and then they vandalized the person's car, and the punishment was, and this happened in New Jersey,
right?
And the punishment was that they couldn't work in New Jersey again, which is just a logic of, well, now there's somebody else's problem. And it really, other than the inconvenience of them moving, and there's something to be said about that, but it's just pushing off the problem. It didn't address the issues, that's for sure. It's just pushing off that problem to some other state and some other population. So I don't understand why just wanting a review of that is un-American, because then that's saying that what was created will always work. And that's just absurd. If you take the circumstances, the culture, the values of anyone 200 plus years ago, it's just 100 plus years ago, 50 years ago. I mean, things change. So yeah, I just don't get it. And to that point, you talked about the origin of policing, and given the whole thing that happened recently during the riots with Kyle, I was surprised to learn about the origin of policing and then see it highlighted so brightly in prioritizing property over human life, which is exactly what you had mentioned via text when we were texting a few days ago.
Right.
And it's something I think that ties into this and is probably worth talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that was the crux of, so the Lost episode. One of the main issues, well, actually, no, sorry, this is not the Lost episode. This is the Lost text messages that we'll not just reread on air. I took umbrage, I'm going to use that word, with there's a YouTuber who I actually think makes pretty good arguments because he's a gun rights activist, and his name is Colin Noir, and he made a very interesting video discussing sort of the rights of a gun owner when they're being attacked, and he was using it to defend. I don't remember what's this guy's name. His full name is, it's Kyle something, which I'm actually surprised that his name was released so easily, because the guy is Rittenhouse, because the guy is a minor. So I was amazed that they just threw his name out there in the press. I guess maybe 17 is an adult in maybe the Midwest in those states, but I thought as a minor that your identity would be withheld. But in the whole argument, when he kept prefacing, he was saying, Kyle, that he was like, this guy had a right to defend himself, and so he'll probably get off, even though he actually killed, well, how many people? Did he kill 2 people, or he killed 1 and injured others? That's irrelevant. He killed 2. But basically, he would eventually get off because he had, it's gun rights, and you have the right to bear arms and what have you. And then he was sort of like prefacing it with, but I just wish everyone wasn't there. Like everyone, I just wish the guys who came out to protest weren't there because there was a curfew. He's like, I wish this guy Kyle decided to stay home. He wasn't there. But in all the footage that the guy was showing, the one thing that kept striking me is that this guy from out of state, 17-year-old, comes in with a bunch of other armed guys, and they say they're there to protect property, right? They're like, all right, we're here to protect these boarded up buildings because these rioters might destroy it.
And administer medical aid.
I just don't know.
It's important.
Is it?
He said it.
He did say it. It's just so absurd. That part is so absurd.
It is absurd.
That part's absurd. We'll get back to it. I want to get back to that.
And it bothers me.
I want to get back to that. We'll circle back to that. But so you have these guys who are there, and they're there protecting property, right? And the thing is that's part of the origin of policing, especially in the North, was to protect property, right? It was to, if the workers kind of got out of hand or they were striking, the cops would be charged by whatever person owned the property, or whether it be a foreman, a high-ranking official, the mayor, to come in and kind of break heads, and keep the peace. And that's what the cops are kind of supposed to be doing. I mean, that's why you see them being so brutal in these protests. But these civilians come in, they're like, well, we're going to do it. We're going to bust heads and break, well, I don't want to say that because they didn't say that. They said protect, right? But they're saying we're going to protect with offensive weapons. We're going to bring in assault rifles to protect property, which to me intimates that if you get out of line, they're going to use these guns in order to keep you away from whatever property, whatever the value that they're trying to protect is. And then you have the protesters who are like, well, we think the social contract is broken. We think society is broken. We don't give a crap about any of these private business owners. We don't give a crap about any of these civil servant buildings or anything, because they're like, we're taxpayers, we pay for it, we think this is broken, we're going to destroy it, okay? And whether people are from this town or they're from out of town, but that's sort of the mentality. So both sides are there over property. And to me, that's what I feel is missing, right, in the conversation. And I don't know how strong to go into this, because, at the end of the day, I don't want to detract from what happened to Blake, like, because that is it's the Black Lives Matter. It's that movement that is at the center of all of this. But to watch Americans sort of get into confrontations and kill each other over other people's property, it just feels like this dystopian capitalistic future that we've clawed ourselves into. It just doesn't make sense, because at the end of the day, property is insured. If the buildings are burned down, these guys have insurance. You have to get insurance in order to create a business. So you will get money if something happens to your business. Your insurance will pay you, and then you can pay other people and you can rebuild. Killing people, there's no bringing these people back. And so for me, I don't understand how you can get to that mentality of, I'm going to value property, I'm going to value something that has monetary value that can be replaced over that of human lives on both sides. I don't understand how you get there, because at the end of the day, the people are gone forever. But the buildings, they'll be here probably in a month. They'll be back, because that's what insurance is for. It's just things.
It leaves me with a lot of questions, and I'm sure that somebody has answers to them. But at a base level, it's okay to say, like, I support the movement, but I don't agree that even though I understand the emotion behind it, and maybe don't understand, but can empathize with it or sympathize with it. I don't condone the destruction of property, but do you think then to a lethal degree, like, should people be killed for that, and killed without due process?
But that's the thing. That
I guess here's the point. Here's the point, right? If you
of like a dystopia, like, that's the mentality of a dictator. That's not democratic value.
Yeah, but I guess to kind of bring it back to the lost episode that maybe we'll have to release someday. Mm-hmm. If you burn down a building and you were brought into custody, would you be put to death by a judge?
Of course not.
And so doesn't that kind of say it all?
Oh, unless of course you kill people within that building. Unless it's some sort of arson, yes. But let's just talk about burning down a vacant building.
Broke windows.
There's no judge in this world that's going to put you to death. There's no jury in our country that will convict you and say you should need to be killed. That will never happen.
I have questions around, where do you draw the line? Okay, are you allowed to protect your property? Are you allowed to protect your property with lethal means? If so, where is the line? If I, as a 15-year-old white kid, want to, I don't know, do something silly on someone's property, and I sit there and start cutting the links in their chain, can someone just shoot me?
Right. So I mean, we got into that. I mean, that was an interesting one.
But I have to bring it to that, because I need to know where, because I don't. And honestly, if I can be killed for something, I'd like to know what the thresholds are, so that I could know that. And are you okay? So now we have the example of if you own the property. Now we have the example of if you don't own the property. Now we know that the police are allowed to enforce property protection laws, but are other people, are citizens, or non-service members allowed to do that? So can you go and inject yourself on someone else's property, which, you know, in essence, you yourself are trespassing then, and allowed to protect someone else's property? Then you have the degree of knowing that there is hostility in the area, because I don't know how the law is written, and I'm hoping that someone can teach me someday, but that has to play a role in this, the circumstance, the context of a riot going on. Can you just go into a riot, say, I want to protect the dollar store, and just sit out there in a camping chair with a rifle and wait for people to come and start shooting? Like, and under the guise of medical attention and you're not a trained medical professional, in fact, you're underage. Like, none of that makes sense to me. And I just don't know. And the gun advocate lawyer that you had sent me was bringing up stuff that seemed to say, yes, you can. Yes, you can protect other people's property with lethal means. And yes, you can inject yourself into a hostile environment, underage, not able to carry a gun across state lines. I guess you can do all of these things. And that's kind of where,
well, to be fair,
I look at the lawyer making a case, and that case that should be made in a court where people are trained to scrutinize it, a judge, jury, other lawyer, and not to the public, where the general public is not trained to scrutinize. They're hearing from someone who they think is an authority, and they're going with it.
Well, look, let's talk about it from the other side. To be fair to Colin, all right, this is also why I do not, even though I'm not a gun rights advocate, and I do not necessarily agree with the Second Amendment and the way that we apply it in this country. He did say that the charge that this kid should cop to, essentially, would be the being underage with a gun in the state, in terms of open carry, because he was like, well, that's the least, that he's not going to be able to get away with that, because that he was in the wrong with regard to that one part of the incident and how it transpired.
That's a really stupid question. Just on that point.
Yeah.
So if I don't know the best way to phrase it, but if someone with a suspended license, or someone who did not qualify for a license, whether it was age or whatever it was, somehow they were driving a car and they legally should not have been, and then someone else runs a red light and they crash into them and they kill that other person, but technically, in terms of the rules of the road, it wasn't their fault, but they weren't ever allowed to drive in the first place. Who is responsible for that death?
I don't want to answer. I can't answer that. I'm not a legal expert. I think there is manslaughter, because there's involuntary manslaughter and what have you, and I think that you would fall into that category because you were driving illegally. I do think that would happen as a result. Yeah. So
is that different here then? If you're not even supposed to have the gun,
we really need a lawyer to weigh in. We really do. We really need someone on.
And that's what I mean. I have so many questions.
For that, in this part in particular, in terms of the legality of what's going on, because look, at the end of the day, Wisconsin is charging this guy with murder. And gun rights activists are like, well, Wisconsin is wrong. And here's where I'll come in. I mean, this is why I do not enjoy the way that we liberally apply the Second Amendment, because this is a state that allows people to openly carry I don't want to say automatic weapons. They're like semi-automatic. That might not even be correct, but let's just call it assault rifles because I don't want to engage in the category of gun. But they had assault rifles, and you're allowed to openly carry those. And the thing is, they're carrying them with the cops right there next to them. I think there's video of some of the cops even giving these guys water and various types of amenities. And thanking them for being out there to help keep the peace. And the state, I'm just saying the state opened itself up to this. So it's sort of like the state has greenlit for an incident to occur and then is bringing down the hammer after it's a perfect storm. It's like they created the storm. They brought the ship into the water. They brought the storm. And then all of a sudden someone dies in it. And it's like, wow, this ship shouldn't have been here. This storm shouldn't have been here. And that's how I kind of view it.
But why weren't they ID'd? I mean, let's forget about
but it
the irony of them not being profiled the way that other groups of people are and asked for ID. If you go to buy cigarettes, if you go buy alcohol, you're ID'd if you look under 40, 50
but that's not the issue. Yeah, but the thing is, I don't think that's the issue. The issue isn't the fact that this kid is underage, because the thing is, let's say it was a 21-year-old who did the same thing. To me, it's crazy that anyone would get away with it, right? That anyone would get off. That's what's saying. It's like it's such a technicality.
You're talking about you're talking about what's acceptable in another state, and if they're allowed to open carry.
Yeah, right.
That's what you're saying.
Right.
No, I mean, I don't agree. I think that we both agree on.
But that's what the state is bringing down on this guy. They're bringing down
of the Second Amendment.
They're bringing the hammer down on him because the guy came from out of state, and they're saying that he brought the gun, which is crossing state lines. That's illegal. His lawyer is attesting that the gun he was given was from in-state, so therefore he didn't cross state lines with the gun. And so he's saying, just like Colin was saying, that the only law he really broke was being underage and open carry. And I just think that that's so beside the point. This guy killed 2 people. It would have been anybody who could have killed 2 people. So, I feel like the state opened itself up to this sort of incident.
But how does that work?
I don't understand how you do that in the modern day.
There's another legal question. If you're from one state that finds something to be illegal and you go to a different state where it is legal, are you allowed to then return to your state, not have committed any crime? Again, I'm just trying. If this kid was not a kid, and I think if he was of age, I don't know if this would be a case. If you let's say if he was of age and it was determined that he picked up the gun in the state, I don't know what you would charge him. All right, so I understand. I'm nitpicking at details that you're talking above, right? You're talking above. So let's just say he was of age, and he's allowed to carry that gun,
right?
And he put himself in the middle of a riot.
Yeah, right. That's my point.
Protecting property that wasn't his,
right?
And
which they all were,
and killed someone,
right? Which is what happened.
And then was chased.
Yep.
And then the argument is, well, he now became. He was no longer the aggressor. He's now the victim because he's being chased, which is odd. And I don't know. Again, I don't know what the law is, and if that's written that way, that's crazy, because that could easily just be used as a tactic by any shooter: kill and then run so that you can't be chased, and then just kill again around the corner. That seems absurd. I guess if you can legally carry and you're of age and you can inject yourself into a riot that is hot, that is where property is being damaged, and then you just go protect someone else's property by shooting, or by putting yourself in a situation that you will knowingly escalate to that degree. I don't know. I guess it just gets into the whole culture of open carry and what you're supposed to do with that gun. This is interesting. So I'm going to reference Stand Your Ground, because Stand Your Ground is, to me, I feel like that's where a lot of this stuff rests upon. And this is, again, freaking Wikipedia. So, I mean, this is it's a shame that we have to, not to disparage Wikipedia, because actually it's probably helpful in a lot of places. But my point is, a person edited this, so I do not know if it's correct 100%. But a Stand Your Ground law, sometimes called line of the sand or no duty to retreat law, provides that people may use deadly force when they reasonably believe it to be necessary to defend against a threat of death. It goes into various formats of death, but I'll skip that. Under such a law, people have no duty to retreat before using deadly force in self-defense, so long as they are in a place where they are lawfully present. There is a citation for that. Stand Your Ground laws cannot be invoked by someone who is the initial aggressor
or who is otherwise engaged in criminal activity. The exact details vary by jurisdiction. The thing is, this kid, I was on the ground when he first killed somebody. I don't think there was a point where he was the natural aggressor by I think if you're talking in terms of legality, in terms of owning a gun. Now, see, this is where I come in. This is where, and again, this is complete personal, not preference, but this is complete subjective in terms of how you view gun ownership. But to me, if you come to a heated situation, which is a third night of a protest where people have been, the police have been, aggressive on both sides. I sound like Trump, aggressive on both sides. My point is, things are hot, right? Whatever, however you want to interpret it. If you come into that situation, openly carrying weapons, especially assault rifle weapons, to me, that's an aggressive move. And the thing is, the law does not back me up. The law actually backs up that you can do that, and you're not an aggressor. And if people attack you for having a gun, you're allowed to defend yourself. And I think that's what happened in this case. But to me, it's aggressive to bring a gun to a knife fight. To quote
something. Yeah.
Quote something.
I'm sure you'll figure it out. No, I agree with you. I think that is the contextual part that I'm getting hung up on. I understand, like, the kid was on his back, he was being chased, he didn't fire a shot, and that I get, like, in isolation, looking at that yeah, he fits all of the descriptions to stand your ground. I get that. But the greater context is there were riots going on, and he went to those to defend someone else's property, even if it was his own property. Like, are you allowed to defend your property with lethal means? Is that okay? Because
yeah, I think. Well, look, home invasion, right? You're allowed to own a gun. If someone invades your home, regardless of the weapon they're carrying, you're allowed to blow them away in most states. So, if you want to base it down to that, then yeah, you're allowed to kill someone who has entered your property. But that's the thing; I think it has to be your property.
Is it a home? I mean, do they make a distinction between your home, where you have nowhere else to go, and like your place of business?
Yeah. Again, that's what we need to get a legal person on in order to really get to the.
And is this?
That. By the way, it's the Untouchables. It's Sean Connery in the Untouchables. So I can't believe I forgot that. It's such a good quote. But yeah, we need a legal mind in terms of that. But again, I feel like we're still getting into the weeds. Like, everyone wants to litigate the merits of gun ownership and whether this kid should have been allowed to kill these two guys. And
maybe it highlights a loophole, and maybe it highlights one of the many pitfalls.
There's so many pitfalls, because again, I don't believe the legislation is enacted in good faith. And again, that now this becomes subjective. So I'm not going to.
You're right. We could sit here and we're obviously going to have a bias towards what our personal beliefs are, even if we try not to. And maybe this is. I mean, there are maybe this and every other example in living memory is a reason to, again, review what we've always thought to be right, what we always thought we needed. Going back to, we talked about the history of policing, the history of the Second Amendment, and why that was enacted. What was the situation that it was that surrounded it, that it was trying to prevent? What other laws and cultural norms was it depending on? I mean, there's a lot that has changed since things were written, and I just worry about things being untouchable. So much changes, and when things are around for a long time, very clever people know how to pacify or manipulate or chip away, and then new generations are born into what exists and don't know any different.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the knee-jerk reaction of, all right, well, let's take a look at some of our foundational principles. Companies, anything, revamps things, looks at them again to change with the times. Why can't we at least have a conversation about it? Why can't we at least have a study on it, multiple studies on it to satisfy all the different parties, and just have a conversation? And maybe it's just an ongoing conversation to start, maybe for generations. But why can't we do that? Why is it so un-American? Why is it met with such ferocity, ferocious opposition to even hint at a reflection, any kind of retrospection? I don't know. Like, the fact that we're not even allowed to talk about it and it's looked at as socialist or communist or fascist, or depending on what side you're on, like, the fact that you can't think and have open conversations about things kind of bothers me.
It should. It really should. I mean, there's no way around it. It really should. It should bother everybody. Even if you are on the right or if you're on the left, so to speak, it should bother everybody that you can't just simply expose your ignorance, and which is what I'm hoping this podcast is about.
Yeah, hopefully we're doing that.
Yeah,
exposing our own,
and have people who are either experts or people with more experience just come into the equation and answer certain parts. And that's the thing, you can have someone with more experience come in and give an idea, because not everything is studied. Just like you're saying, right? We have not been able to enact a proper study on gun ownership in America, right? Every time the NIH or any health organization tries to tackle the issue of guns from a health perspective, they're immediately cast out. I think Obama's original Surgeon General wrote like a small little op-ed on the effects of guns on mental health, and as a result, he was persona non grata, and he had to go with another pick, right? Because it's a third rail. Guns is just a third rail across the board, and now it turns out that policing is starting to be a third rail across the board. And it's like, how many things in America are we going to allow to become third rails where you just cannot discuss them or without being labeled un-American? And at what point does that start to become this glass ceiling of thought, or of losing train of thought in terms of that? You could pick it up, but you know where I'm going. I'm just saying, when does that become, like you said, actually, you put it best, where you're talking about new generations get born into it and then don't question it, and it just becomes this part of the status quo, and it's like it's just a small chip away. It's like a small rolling snowball of you don't want to say fascism, but it definitely, I don't know what else you call a place where ideas are no longer allowed to run free, where you can no longer be an idealist, where you have to conform and you have to say, I support the flag, I support the troops, I support the police, I support corporations, and that is what makes me American. And anyone who does not do any of those things is un-American and is seditious and should be put down in one way or another. And I feel like that's where we're getting to, though. That's where you're coming. That's where I feel. Then that's where the natural course to me runs.
Well, and I would say that, I mean, the way that you just said that, and that's what it means to be American. I would almost make the argument that everyone does feel that way. It's just a difference in how you define support, or how much you've actually thought about what support looks like. I support all those things, but I support it in a way that I want to fix it. I don't want to ignore it. I don't want to move to a different country because that's what people say you should do if you don't agree with the way things are done. Why can't my version of support say, maybe we should have some type of evaluation to make sure that the things that I support are functioning properly with the changing times, whether it's the way that people think, the technology that's available, the information that we've developed. Why does it have to be left alone and never talked about? Why is it that if we look at data and we see that a portion of the population, or whatever it might be, is being underserved, why can't we go back and say, is there a better way to do this? And have an honest conversation. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean other people will have to have less? Does it mean that everyone is just kind of elevated? Why can't we just talk about it? Why does it have to be, if you want to change something, or if you're saying something is deficient, then you're not American and you shouldn't even be here? I don't know. Why can't we just reevaluate? Why can't we just review? I know I'm saying the same thing over and over, but it
makes sense. It goes back though to, I think maybe in our first episode, where it's like, well, why are you allowed to simply make a broad statement like, I want to use something more contemporary. Why are you allowed to make a broad statement like, I don't know, Mexicans are rapists, right? Which is like something that Trump has basically
said it.
Right, exactly. Why are you allowed to say that? And then no one's, not nobody, but why do the majority of people not pause, take a step back and go, well, is there any data to back that up? Or, where did you cite, like, where is that citation coming from?
They chalk it up to style. They chalk it up to hyperbole and style. I'm not condoning it, that.
No, I know, but I'm just saying.
Like, that's what they do.
Well, there's the answer to your question, though. That's what I'm saying, because my point is, you could do that with anything, right? You could literally do that with anything.
Well, that's him making statements.
It's not just him.
Atrocious. Let's just use that. That's him making statements as atrocious as that is. My thing is, maybe this is a terrible example to use. I don't know if I even want to go down the rabbit hole of, well, let's do a study of it. But because I actually, that's we're getting into dangerous ground there. I don't agree with even putting a study like that in place. But there's one thing to make statements, but why, if you think an institution or a law or whatever it may be, if something is underperforming, because it has not been written with the capability or enacted with the capability of updating itself, why can't we just review it? Why can't we just review it? Trump making statements like that, I don't even know what that's just like some guy making.
He's not alone, though. He's really not alone. I mean, there you could find equally salacious statements from a number of congressmen, and that's like saying. So let's go back to policing, since that's kind of what we were talking about. And you're going to say that. It goes back, right? Like it's
minorities are criminals or something, right?
That's how I started it.
But so you're going to say something like that, and my knee-jerk reaction to that isn't so much, other than the fact of why did you just say that? Please be more sophisticated. Is why are crimes being committed if they are falling within a certain demographic? Why is that happening? Not so much like a whole compliance with cops issue and justification for shootings, but all right, well, if you think that that's true, why is that happening? And can we get to the issue there? I'm not trying to give the claim credence and saying anything. I'm kind of probably not doing a good job in thinking out loud here off the cuff. But if you think that society is underperforming in some way, regardless of what it is, and this policing thing is difficult to talk about for me sometimes because my notions on it are so fresh, but why not try to get to the systemic issue that makes it a talking point to begin with, instead of justifying our tactic to temporarily resolve it? So in this case, police just arresting, trying, imprisoning, feeding this cycle. If you really think that this is an issue, then why aren't we having an open conversation with why this exists?
Well, because I don't think everyone thinks it's an issue. I mean, that's really, I think, where you're gonna come into it, because I think that a lot of people think the solution is to continue doing what we've always done, and that is to incarcerate people. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. Where that's how you get. If
it's always the
that's
same.
That's how you get the Judge
thing.
Dredd sort of ideologue on the I don't want to demonize Republicans as a complete group in this way, but every time someone says a but, that this is the truth of the matter. I'm going to. They are usually the law and order party, and usually Democrats are trying to keep up and say, "Well, we're law and order too," and then that's where you get the Clinton crime bills, right? But we just continued this slope down this trajectory of imprisonment, and here's the thing: is there more crime in Chicago than a suburb, like wherever you live, right? I by the numbers, there's more people, but I can't, the data will show.
It's a type of crime. It's a type of crime.
But the data will show that there's more crime, right? Regardless of how you chunk it down. If you just go from very top level, Chicago is going to have more crime than your suburb.
But it's not evenly distributed. To your point earlier in this episode, when we were just speaking, am I being hauled in for something in the suburbs?
Right.
That you would be hauled in for.
Yeah,
so you can't. It's hard to look
exactly.
at statistics from two different types of areas.
Which is what I'm trying to get to. Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head there. Exactly. Not only is it so difficult to quantify the crime that's taking place because we do not enforce crime universally the same across counties and states in this country. For instance, the South is known and has been critiqued many times for enforcing jaywalking in poor areas, which usually are heavily minority. Whereas that is a crime that I bet if we looked up the rolls in New York City, I do not know if there was a single jaywalking enforcement all of last year. So you're right.
I will say this: you actually just brought up. This is sort of related, but not, and it kind of doesn't support your point. But I'll just say it.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to North Carolina once, and the one thing that I remember from walking around North Carolina is that nobody jaywalked, regardless of race. It was the most bizarre thing I have ever seen. I remember I constantly jaywalked. I was just like, there's no cars. Like, there was no cars. It was a college town. College wasn't in session. There was nobody around. And the few people that were walking around refused to cross the street. 2-lane streets. I found it to be insane. But yeah, that happened.
But you weren't arrested.
No, but that's what I mean, though. I mean, maybe it does support your point, but
yeah, I'm just saying.
But what I'm saying is that everyone local, like white, black, whatever,
mm-hmm.
No one was jaywalking. It was like just something that always stuck out to me, and it's something that I always say when I hear about North Carolina, and I have very little to offer. But yeah, I don't know. That's something that always stuck out to me. That doesn't represent the whole South. That doesn't represent the whole of North Carolina. But where I was in that moment, I don't know. I felt like the need to share.
Well, even if people aren't following the rules, my point is that the millions of people who jaywalk a day in New York City are not stopped.
Which is what I was used to.
And
there's no jaywalking in New York City.
Well,
you'll get run over. Yeah, but no one.
Well, everyone jaywalks. No, what are you talking about? No one walked. You're telling me that, well, first of all, we're not even going to get into the weeds of people. First of all, it's so laughable to think of walking all the way down a block.
Trampled by other pedestrians. No one abides by that. Everyone crosses the street as soon as it's open, arguably even when it's not open.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. Jaywalking
I've been stuck in intersections trying to drive through New York so many times because people just dart out, and then the light changes and I'm screwed.
Yeah, no, jaywalking is not a thing. I mean, that's my point. It's not enforced. But that aside, because I think I illustrated it more aptly with the kids smoking weed on the beach versus kids smoking weed in Brooklyn. Not only is the enforcement not universal, but you have to look at when you keep taking the same approach, this sledgehammer of justice that we keep harping on, more police, more rigid sentencing. Our prison population is the most in the westernized world, and that's nothing to be proud of. I don't know. Yeah, maybe some people are proud of that, but I personally, from my politics, it's not something I would be proud of because first of all, it suggests a few things. It would suggest that for some reason, American society cultivates more criminals than any other Western nation, and I think that's an issue, right? If let's say that were true, and then Secondly, it says that we have a horrible way of rehabilitating people, which means we have high recidivism rates, and that's also not something to be proud of. What's up?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, that was the point I was going to bring up, is that, obviously one is the law is not evenly applied, and therefore it's not evenly documented, and therefore it can't be evenly reported on. But I would, I don't really, I don't know exactly what we do within our prison systems to rehabilitate and reintroduce and kind of wipe the slate clean with people after they come out of the system. But I don't think that we focus on rehabilitating as much as we should. And I would almost make an argument that we don't even understand what it is to rehabilitate someone. Saying, here's your belongings, and offering a class or something while you're imprisoned, and then sending them out with a blemish on their record, that, I don't know, and exposing them to an environment that they may not be with like people for what they've done. I don't know. It's just something about the whole way that we go about imprisoning people and then putting them back into the population, expecting them to be good, law-abiding, productive, contributing citizens. Just never felt right. It seems like an impossible task. It seems unrealistic. And then they fall into this cyclical experience where they just can never really dig themselves out of. And then we kind of just blame them as a society. Like, well, you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, it's hard because I'm stuck in this vicious cycle. Well, I guess you shouldn't have done anything in the first place.
Yes.
Let that be a lesson to the next.
Let that be a lesson to
and it's like, well, what does that do?
Nothing.
Right, exactly. The lesson is not widely communicated, and the lesson is like, what, you better be a better criminal if you don't have the opportunity that everyone else has been afforded to rise in the first place?
Except you're looking at whole generations of people, right?
Yeah.
So
there's such a backlog at this point.
Exactly.
With damaged families from all the affected families of
damaged generations of people. How do you ever come back from that? Exactly. Let this be a lesson to you for the rest of basically all minorities in all time,
and let's be honest, if someone was like, let that be a lesson to you and let that be a lesson to all your friends, people don't respond to that kind of stuff.
I mean, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, again, they'll be interesting to do a study based on that. But you're based on the fact that how many people get arrested for the exact same types of crime or drug dealing or what have you, it definitely would say that the lesson does not get communicated. And it gets reinforced because people have to come back out, and if they're not getting hired and that they can't vote, again, this is where we could do not a whole episode on it, but this is where it comes into fighting for prisoners to be able to vote, because essentially, if voting in my mind makes you a citizen, right? It's supposed to be something that is quintessential to a democracy, and if you get that right taken away from you, you're no longer a participant in that democracy. And it's sort of like, well, what do you expect? People who have committed crimes, they've been ostracized from society, and then now they can no longer participate in terms of voting and being part of the society and helping to shape that society. What do you expect them to do, right? Because you're basically from the outset, they're a social pariah. They're no longer part of the society. If you cannot vote in a society, you are not a part of the society. The social contract's broken. And so why would you then start to operate within the laws and confines of that society if you can no longer shape it?
Yeah, and here's where, again, not to just like keep copping out to we need a study on that, but I feel like we have such smart people, such smart approaches to problem solving that we should employ them more often. When it comes to something like penalizing people and then having a record on them that lasts a lifetime, I just have, again, more questions. What is the point of putting them through the system and then releasing them if they have this lingering baggage that they can never shake, voting being one of them? But I also ask, do we know if it's effective? Obviously, we put these penalties into place to dissuade them and others from doing like crimes, but also to perhaps, mitigate further bad choices? I mean, I need someone to explain to me the purpose of not letting someone vote. Is it because they can no longer be trusted and they're just all the criminals are going to gather around and vote for a criminal candidate?
Yeah. I mean,
Is that the logic?
I can't say that that's
is
the
that
logic.
for
That's
real?
how it feels to me.
Is there going to be a criminal union where they all kind of like a criminal party?
Yeah, but
they all kind of gather together to do that.
It's distrust and it's continued punishment, right? Because it's.
Then what's the point of letting them out?
Exactly. At that point, that's the thing. Once you're convicted of a crime, it's essentially a life sentence. It's a scarlet letter. Let's call it what it is.
You're not going to trust them to vote, but you're going to trust them to handle your food. Or to I don't know, do anything else that we do. But do you know what I mean? Like,
well, let's not get into how capitalism works. So yes, that is what you would do. Just like, well, don't want to go extreme, but yes, our society will trust.
Where's the what
incredible responsibility to the people making the least amount of money. I'm going to pull
out, but and again, I don't know if that whole thing that I just said, like they're going to somehow coalesce around voting in a criminal candidate. That's why we don't let them to vote. I don't know if that's true, but let's just say for a second it is. I don't know the most popular job for someone that comes out of prison that falls into the same bucket as not being allowed to vote. But whatever it is, let's just say it's food oriented. Why isn't there a party that just like they all come together and poison everyone at once? Like what that logic of them all coming together to somehow hurt society to get back at them, some type of vengeance or just exercising bad judgment. Is that based on anything? Is it rooted in fact? Is this a fairy tale that started off with something true? Like, where is that coming from? Is it just an assumption?
Well, I mean, we could be cynical here. And that's the thing. I don't know where we should go with the pod.
By being really naive, is it just like based on racism, and that's what it is?
Yeah,
another way to suppress the vote because most people that are imprisoned are African Americans, and is that what it is? It
feels that way. It feels that way. That's the thing. It's like where there's smoke, is there fire? I mean, it feels that way. Yes, especially when you look at the South and the high incarceration rates, and if you're going back to the enforcement of the most punitive, the most minor infractions, you get a record, you go to jail, and you can no longer vote. And then that creates a massive population of black people in an area that is mostly red, that actually outnumber the white population in those areas, or the non-minority populations. And they no longer have any political say, so they can't participate in the system. So yeah, I mean, if you wanted to be naive about it and just say what a happy coincidence, it very much leaves the minority group, which is, and by when I say minority, I mean the smaller white population in those states, with more power because they're the only ones that could vote, versus the larger minority, which is the black population or Hispanic or what have you. In the brown population of those states, who, while they outnumber the whites of the state because of the criminality or because of the rate in which they are incarcerated, have less of a voting bloc, have less ability to enact change because they can't vote. Yeah, I mean, it's cynical, but it does play with Jim Crow.
It's a motive because
with the legacy.
When you see a lot of laws,
plays with the legacy.
When you see. I'm not even going to say most laws. When you see some laws, they're usually a reaction to something. Something happened. We don't want that to happen again. So now we're going to have a law to help prevent it in some way. Make it illegal, whatever it was. And so this whole idea of, well, if you go to prison, and I don't know what the crimes are that would qualify you for no longer being able to vote. I don't know. But somehow that became a thing. So what you're saying, because I don't know what that's trying to prevent, that would kind of make sense. And it goes back to the whole like being born into something, only till, relatively recently, I'm in my 30s, only till relatively recently did I really give this notion any thought. And I was born into, you commit certain crimes, you lose the right to vote or whatever the government says that you lose. And that's fair, right? Why should criminals be able to vote? Like, I don't know. That's what I was told. And that's what I believe without really questioning it. But as you get older, you start to question things, hopefully. And why... Is this something that's revisited other than, I think, Bernie? This is part of Bernie's platform, right? If I recall correctly, he wanted to give... I
don't want to take it away. I don't remember it being part, but it very well could have been.
Maybe. For some reason I thought it may have been. But, why isn't something like that questioned? Why is that... I feel like that would be a hot button topic. I feel like if I went to people I know that are Republicans and I was like, why don't criminals have the right to vote? I think what I would get is the fear that they would somehow, I don't know, overthrow the government. You know, that's probably being hyperbolic, but I feel like that's kind of the sentiment that I would get, is that they can't be trusted. But I don't really know.
Yeah, but why would you? But that's what's so weird about it. Why would you campaign and advocate for the right to participate within the confines of the system just to overthrow it? Wouldn't you be more likely to overthrow a government if you were completely ostracized and no longer felt like you were part of that government? Wouldn't that lead you to more likely want to be seditious? Like, why would you? Why, if you have your needs met and you're able to vote in people that you believe represent you, would you all of a sudden feel this alienation that you're just going to go and blow things up because you're getting your way? That you're participating. That's the way government works. That's how a democracy works.
But I'll take a one-dimensional route down the rabbit hole here and say, all right, you were arrested for money laundering. I don't know, and now you're not allowed to vote anymore. Crime. Right, and now you're not allowed to vote anymore, or whatever kind of crime you want to do. Is the idea that you're going to vote for a candidate that makes money laundering legal now? Like, what is? I'm just having a hard time like taking what I think is the fear and like following it through. Like, what's the end result look like?
I think it'll be interesting to look at for someone to chime in and tell us about the history of those acts, like when you lost voting rights. Because I don't know if that was always in our Constitution, or if that was it's not in our Constitution. So I don't know if it was always in our legal framework from the founding to modern day. In my head, I will bet a lot of money, and well, I shouldn't say that, but I would like to bet something and say that it probably materialized somewhere around Reconstruction, like post-Civil War. I want to put it in there, maybe something to that nature. But I will say this. So there was a Vox article. It was May 13th, 2019. It said the Democratic debate over letting people in prison vote explained, and I'll just read the byline. Bernie Sanders sparked a debate over prisoners' voting rights, but most of the public and most Democrats aren't on board, without even getting into the article. But yeah, so you're right. He did. I don't know if it was part of his formal platform, but he definitely brought it up. And I think that's hilariously, it's just hilarious that left, right, most people feel that if you've done a crime, you deserve to be punished for the rest of your life. And you're right, and it's antithesis to the point of imprisonment, because imprisonment is supposed to be the punishment. The punishment is going to prison. For some reason, our society thinks that the punishment is everything that happens after prison, which is no longer being able to support yourself or participate in civilization.
So I'm looking this up, and we'll have to. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not doing this topic justice because
we might have to
on
get
some
back
I'm on
into
some
it.
I'm on some website that I don't even know what it is, but it's giving me some type of information.
Well, what's it called? Just cite it.
Procon.org.
Okay. This definitely sounds precarious, but go for it.
I mean, it's citing things that are easily checkable if I go to do it. So it says so it's 1789. The U.S. Constitution forges a link between voting in national elections and state suffrage rules, and it's basically saying that it was a compromise that divorced being a citizen from having the right to vote. And then it skips ahead to 1792. Kentucky Constitution is first among U.S. states to establish criminal disenfranchisement. Jeez, had trouble with that one. And then in 1793, Vermont did it. And so it kind of, and it's for those guilty of bribery, corruption, and other crimes, bribery, perjury, forgery, other high crimes and misdemeanors. So it's from fairly early in our country's history that these were put into place. It's not just a Southern issue, obviously, Vermont, right? But I don't know the history of Vermont and where their culture lied. So I'd be curious to learn more about this. And then in 1802, and it's like states, it's every couple years since then: 1802, 1812, 1816, Ohio, Louisiana, Indiana, Mississippi, Connecticut, Alabama, Missouri. all in like the early 1800s. New York, 1821. They all did this criminal disenfranchisement. So that's interesting. I'd love to know. So this is just kind of citing the year and what was done, but doesn't give any context as to why. But they do have citations to the books on here. So if you just Google, what did I Google? When did criminals start losing the right to vote? And that was the first result. I'd be curious to now read some of these citations to figure out if there's a reason behind it. What were they trying to prevent? What happened that they were like, oh wow, criminals voting, that's not working out for us. We need to prevent that. And is it still relevant today? Have we moved beyond whatever the criminals were trying to do? Do we understand the nature of why they were doing it more? Is there more of a systemic issue that, whether it's whatever it may be? Is there a way to approach this? So
okay, I mean, I think that's really good point. I mean, but I'm actually happy I learned that, because I would have bet top dollar that a lot of these laws didn't come into place until post Civil War and during Reconstruction.
I don't know whether or not they were further added on to after.
The best we're getting, because I was trying to do a little quick research as well, is that they were definitely disproportionately enforced upon African Americans in the South during Reconstruction and into Jim Crow. That's not to anyone's surprise, but what is surprising is that I would never have imagined that disenfranchisement laws were on the books so early in the country's founding. So I think that's interesting. I don't know why we would have done that. I guess that was more to further. I don't understand why.
Well, that's what I'm kind of getting to.
I don't really know where they come from.
But so if there wasn't a point of origin to say, oh my God, look at what these guys are doing, we need to make sure they can't do this. Was it just to scare people? Was it like, don't do that? Why? Well, I don't know. We don't have prisons large enough to hold all you guys, so we're just going to take away the right to vote. Like, was it just a means of slapping you on the wrist?
Yeah.
And that scared people enough in a new country? It's a brand new country. You just fought and died or know someone that did for it. And now we're going to take away your right to participate in it. Maybe that was, at the time, context, and everything, a huge deal. What do you mean? This is a brand new country and now I can't participate in voting? Like, oh my God, I'm never going to commit this crime again, and hopefully no one else will. Maybe that was a big deal then. But now with, voting participation down much, maybe it's not as big of a deal. And maybe if that's what it was, again, now it needs to be reviewed because it doesn't have the teeth it once did. And now we're just, doing more harm than good, I think.
No, I think that's a good wrap up. That's really good. I agree. I mean, I think that's so cool. I mean, it's not cool what's happening, but I'm saying that the logical progression that you came up with there sounds good to me. But I would be very interested to know where the impetus came from. Like, it'll be interesting to hear or to read something from a founding father or someone who was around at that time that helped with enacting those laws, whether it be in Vermont or New York, as to the reasoning. Because that to me, that does sound very. It does sound like it, because you're right. We wouldn't have huge prison complexes to house murderers and what have you, unsavory people. So you're right. That might have been it. That might have been the ultimate, smackdown, is you can no longer participate in this grand experiment. That sounds severe enough to me. But at the end of the day, I keep thinking, what is the point of creating massive, angry mobs of people that are all in the same boat? So that it only works if you're only having like a couple, like one or two briberies or one or two murders a year, where it's like these murderers could be outcast and then no one's feeding them, no one's doing business with them, and so they end up dying or perishing. The current prison complex we have today, we've got millions of people in prison. There's millions of people not participating. I mean, I get it's more of a testament to how clannish we are, because you're right. Prisoners are not a monolith. They have conservative ideology. They have liberal ideology. They're not going to come together and form a prison party. That's just not going to happen because of the nature of how we grow up and the values that we have depending on where we're from in the country. Prisoners aren't. That's why that's not why there are prison riots, but I'm just saying, from what I understand of prisons, you kind of stick with your own. It's not a kumbaya, we're all here together, let's get through it together, attitude. So, I don't think there's any fear of a prison party that just starts electing convicts into the Senate or Congress. But all that being said, if you were a former prisoner, I don't see a reason why you should not be allowed to serve in office if you've done your time, because that's the point of time.
Right? Well, that's kind of like what I always come back to. What's the point of this rehabilitation or a guise of rehabilitation if they have so many limitations coming out? What's the point of it all? Just that we can't afford to keep so many people in prison for life? Like, shouldn't we focus on reintroducing people? I don't know.
I agree. All right, I guess we'll leave it there.